Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the grand opening of 28 years later, so many years after 28 weeks later, which was of course a follow-up to 28 days later. Personally, not my favorite in the franchise. It gets a bit messy, especially in the third act. Overall, a decent film, but nothing to write home about. And also the release of the new Disney Pixar film, Elio. And oh boy, Elio is right now one of the worst openings in Disney history, let alone Disney Pixar history, with only $21 million domestically and only about $35 million globally. This puts the movie basically on the same opening weekend as that of Strange World back from 2022. That is how bad things have gotten for the, quote, original stories from Disney, but also about how bad things have gotten when it comes to films that are not a reboot, sequel, some kind of relying on previous audiences of some sort, like Lilo and Stitch, for instance, when it comes to Disney. And Disney is just not able to bring about really that same magic that they were able to for so many years and so many decades. And it does, I think, spell a lot of trouble for them moving forward, because whereas they could look forward to Toy Story 5 or some of those other films that will likely do much better than their other fare throughout the year, is still not necessarily going to be enough if they can't rely on their audiences even for their more original or lesser known content. This is, again, a very, very bad opening weekend for them, and this is likely going to be one of the biggest flops of 2025 and potentially of the last several years, especially if the rumored budget growing to almost $300 million is anywhere close to being true. Now, we talked about this in the box office preview, that folks over at Deadline and all of the trades are reporting this $150 million figure. Typically, when trades are reporting those numbers, it's because the studios will kind of leak certain numbers out to them, kind of give them a ballpark, as it were, quote, ballpark of the figures that they have. And so, therefore, they will just run with it, and people will just assume that it is fact. Now, we know as a fact that Disney oftentimes is disingenuous, if not outright lies, in the numbers that are put out there, because especially when it comes to the Disney Marvel movies, those movies oftentimes were given a public figure of $150 to $200 million, and then they all ended up costing well over $300 million when everything else was taken into account, when you took into account the delays, and also, of course, the reshoots that almost all of those movies ultimately had. When it comes to the film Elio, we know that there was one director set to, create this movie. He could not finish the film, and so they had to bring on two more directors to finish the film, and there were some changes to the story, likely some reshoots, I guess, reanimations of some kind done, because apparently if you even compare the trailers from when it was first announced and the first trailers were released compared to the more recent ones, certain story arcs, certain characters, and certain motivations seem to even change from the trailers alone themselves. And if you take the word of those over at Film Threat for it, and also the audience just not even going to see the movie over on Critic List, and those who have seen it, the 6 or so who have so far as of the recording of this video, mostly giving it bogus to heinous scores, this is not a good look for them. And this will, again, be one of the biggest flops of the year. We'll talk more about, again, what we expect from the film. Some people might try to bring up, well, Elemental didn't have a very good opening, and it ended up flaking out. Big difference being that Elemental was, at the very least, well received by most people. Elio is not getting that, and it's much more of a mixed bag in many cases, and mixed bags tend not to do all that well in today's modern box office. And so we'll talk about that, and of course, we won't make our firm, full projections on the film until next weekend, but we have some comparisons to bring up that I think will hopefully spell the picture about why things are off to a very rocky start, not looking all that great. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it, starting off at the top of the chart. How to Train Your Dragon live action in the second weekend of release, dropping 56%. So 56% overall is not the worst drop-off in the world. However, for not just a kids movie, but a family movie that has gotten as much of a spotlight attention on it, 56% drop is actually pretty bad. If you actually compare that to the number 2 movie, which only made $30 million, $8,700 per screen versus $8,400 per screen. This is the kind of weekend that How to Train Your Dragon should be dominating every other person. The fact that every other film, the fact that a rated R movie that's really kind of out there as far as how it is made and who it's reaching out to in many ways, a very divisive film as well as far as what people think about it. The fact that it was not able to just decimate 28 years later is, I think, a pretty big sign also as far as longevity of the movie. What we can project right now is that the chances of a film like How to Train Your Dragon getting to $1 billion are essentially out the window. And I know that's not the end-all be-all of success, but we also know that these studios love to have movies like that they can then go back to their stockholders with, and that they can then, use to promote in their promotional materials, saying, over $1 billion worldwide. They love that. They love to have those kinds of figures and those kinds of numbers. And I imagine that some people at Universal thought, hey, this might actually be having that potential. But as of right now, the tracking is not looking that way. And though this will be probably the best performing of the entire franchise, again, obviously this live action film and then also all of the other animated movies, we also can say that it is also not going to be even close to $1 billion film. We're talking about a range of between $500 to $750-ish million by the end of its run. We'll talk about and go through those numbers and why we have those numbers as they are. But again, not a bad look for them. The budget being only $150 million means that they are well on their way to making some profit. That being said, I think that they probably wanted a bit more for this movie. Going to the number 2 film of this weekend is 28 Years Later. Again, not a fan of it myself for the most part. I do think that there were some really good things in there. The first third of the film was solid. The second third, it gets a little bit wonky there, especially with some of the things they expect you to buy into this universe, especially with what has been previously established about these, quote, zombies, right? Rage virus zombies starting to have a little bit of that. And this, I think in this movie, it's very clearly that, oh no, they're just flat out zombies now, and they're going to follow kind of the same tropes that other zombie films have already done. So the changes and the things they add in seem almost to be derivative of those other ones. And one of the things that was most unique and most enjoyable about the 28 Days franchise, right, whether it was 28 Days or 28 Weeks, was how it kind of, again, though it was definitely in the vein of zombie movies, it went its own route in many ways, right? It almost took its own chances. It made its own various decisions, and they were always very, very interesting, right? It was very interesting to see the characters and to see the world building that was going on and what they had to go through. 28 Years Later kind of misses that quite a bit. There was a lot of potential that the film had and a lot of things that it could have done, and sadly, it just didn't do that. Again, there's still some good things in there, but overall, I think because it's a bit confusing, especially the ending, which just comes out of nowhere, and I don't think comes across very good either, that might be why this film did not make nearly as much as some people had thought it might make. $30 million, though, for a rated R movie is again, I think actually a very, very solid number to see so far. Elio, on the other hand, number 3 film this weekend from Disney Pixar, only $21 million. Just for a frame of reference, that means it only barely beats Strange World from 2022 when you adjust those numbers for inflation. We're talking about less than $1 million separation between those two movies, which means they have almost the same number of ticket sales. In fact, there's more of an edge you could probably give to Strange World than to Elio because of how much ticket prices have really gone up in the last couple of years. That being said, it is just, again, no matter how you look at it, no matter how you spin it, a really, really bad number for the movie. And I think that Disney and Marvel should definitely, Pixar, Marvel, all of them should be very concerned about the health of their company moving forward. As soon as I say that, though, I have to also mention Lilo and Stitch, because Lilo and Stitch dropped 38% in its 5th weekend of release. And I hate to keep doing this, right? It feels like a yo-yoing effect. It feels like almost the most confusing movie to ever be released. And I just wrote an article for Geeksy Gamers, my weekly box office breakdown article. Check that out always every week, geeksygamers.com. And what I noticed and what I laid out there was that what we have going on is a situation where there are some weeks and days that this film is, again, dropping off quite a bit, right? Slowing down quite a bit. But then there's other days, including this past weekend, especially internationally, where a lot of stuff seems to be happening. And so I'm going to try to lay out exactly what I think is going to go on going forward. But I think I do have to also, again, kind of pull back from what I was mentioning last week. Last week I said, okay, now I don't think there's any chance for this film to hit $1 billion. And I hate to go back on that word here, but I'm always going to be honest with you guys. I'm always going to say, hey, here's what the numbers are. Some people have mentioned in the comment section that the internationals had not updated on thenumbers.com. Sure enough, that was the case. And so it did add on a little bit more, but really the big difference I think is this past weekend, because it's already jumped now to $910 million globally. Last weekend, it was around 858, and that was without some of those international numbers being reported. And when they did get reported, and as we went into further the week, we were getting into the 870 range. And so it's like, okay, that's pretty good. The fact that you're adding another $30 to $40 million globally, and only about 9 of that's coming from your domestic, tells me those international numbers are actually a lot healthier and stronger. So yeah, we're talking about a very, very good chance now, I would say, for the film to be, again, I feel like I'm kind of going crazy here, and I'm sure people are going to say, oh, well, last week you said this or that. It's like, look, this is like one of the only times a movie has done this to where it's like, okay, I really don't know exactly what the end point is going to be. But again, $1 billion back on the table for Lilo and Stitch. We'll see what happens next weekend. If it drops another 50% or so, maybe that goes out the window. We'll have to wait and see. The number 5 spot went to Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Again, percentage-wise, seems to be holding well. It just costs way too much money to actually make the film. Going into the global numbers, How to Train Your Dragon, $358 million is the current number here. I did double check on Deadline to make sure that the numbers were equal, that the numbers were being reported as the same, since sometimes these numbers can get, a little bit outdated, or rather not get up to date as frequently and as often as it should be. But with $358 million in its second weekend of release, again, it's doing very, very well, but we can also say, yeah, $1 billion not likely to happen for this movie. We'll look at the chart in just a little bit. 28 years later, $60 million, again, a pretty decent opening for a film that cost about $60 million, at least according to the numbers.com. And again, we'll have to look and see what the reporting is on that as well. But again, solid opening there for a rated R movie. We'll have to see what the second weekend numbers are to know for sure whether the film will make or lose any money. But as of right now, it's not looking too bad. On the other hand, for Elio, we can say this is a bad opening. All right, so this is a film that cost at least $150 million. Again, early reporting was $300 million. The trades are saying 150, so I think it's probably somewhere between those two numbers, because I think the original movie probably did cost 150, but once the reshoots came in, once the new directors came in, once all of those things had to be updated and changed and delayed, obviously there were delays as well for this. Even the poster on the numbers.com tells you only in theaters 2024. So the movie was set to be released last year and got delayed, and so that tells you all that you need to know about, hey, that 150 probably not accurate. Again, Disney is notorious for overspending on movies. 150 for this movie would already be way too much. 300 million sounds a little bit more realistic here, but just how bad is this number? Let's give some comparisons. Okay, so first, Elemental. At the end of its first weekend, back in just a couple years ago, Elemental was at 30.6 million. So that's not a very good opening weekend, right? That's a pretty weak opening weekend, but in general, it was able to leg out over time, right? So $30.6 million is what the film was able to make in its opening weekend domestically, and so, again, was able to leg out quite a bit, and that is why the film was able to end at around $500 million. Again, all these numbers are adjusted for inflation, and that's why, again, people might say that in the comment section, well, Elemental didn't look like it had the best opening weekend. Yes, that might be true, but even internationally, the numbers were actually, again, quite a bit better. I think in total internationally, global total was around 45 million unadjusted completely, so probably closer to $50 million. This is at 35 million, so if those percentages continue on, in a best case scenario, Elio would potentially get to 300 million, but here's the also big difference. Elemental got pretty overwhelming positive support, positive vibes for it, even over on criticlist.com. Overall, it's a rad score with all the reviews that have been posted so far since that film first came out a couple years ago. Elio doesn't even have 10 reviews yet at this point. Again, just did open, but typically Criticlist is very good. It's a very high, movie-going audience there as far as people going to see the movies every single week. The fact that only 6 reviews have been posted and the vast majority of them are really, really bad, I don't think the word of mouth is at all the same, so I don't think you can compare. But even that being the case, right? Elemental had an edge there. Strange World, which is the one this film is most acting like, was at $20.2 million in its opening weekend, adjusted for inflation. So again, it barely beat out Strange World. And we could easily get adjustments. Elio could actually end up making less. It could also end up making more. But the fact that you're barely beating out Strange World and that film only ended up making $80 million globally by the end of its run, yeah, that's not a good sign at all. Good Dinosaur is historically a well-known box office flop from Disney. $74 million was its opening weekend adjusted for inflation. And then, of course, Lightyear, another well-known Disney flop. $54 million was its opening weekend. So it just gives you an idea, right? That came out in June, so actually around the same weekend, just a few years ago. That was closer to the pandemic, too. And the fact that was able to beat out Elio, it can tells you quite a bit about where Elio is currently at the box office. Lilo and Stitch, $910 million. As I mentioned, this is just a movie. It's very hard to pinpoint where this film's going to end up. And here's what I'm thinking, okay? So first, we have obviously the comparison with the film that was one of the closest to get to $1 billion this year, which was a Minecraft movie, and around $950-ish million, according to the numbers.com. And then another movie from a few years ago, Jurassic World Dominion, because that film barely eked out a billion-dollar release. Now, most of that money, by the way, for Jurassic World Dominion did come from the international market. We're not going to see those same numbers here for Lilo and Stitch. What we are seeing, however, is that Lilo and Stitch's current domestic is actually quite comparable. So at the same point of release, right, what we have going on here is we have Lilo and Stitch, Minecraft, and Jurassic World Dominion. So at the same point, as of right now, 386 million total domestic for Lilo and Stitch. At the same point of release, we had a Minecraft movie at $398 million. Now, what's interesting here is that Lilo and Stitch did much better in the weekday performances, right? From Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and even Friday, the number is higher for Lilo and Stitch versus a Minecraft movie. However, Minecraft, in its fifth weekend, still was able to eke out these pretty big wins box office wise at the weekend box office. And so it's going to be interesting to see where that battle ends up. It's still a very interesting one. What we can say, though, is though that battle might be kind of back and forth, Lilo and Stitch has beaten Minecraft's international. So 522.9 is the last reported international total for Minecraft. 523.6 is where Lilo and Stitch currently is. So that's a huge win for them in that regard. And so even if Lilo and Stitch doesn't fully beat out Minecraft domestically, I think it has a very good chance to do so based off of, again, where it's currently legging out. We'll have to wait and see. Again, Minecraft's weekend domestic numbers might just be too strong at this point if Lilo and Stitch is not able to catch up, but still very strong. And another reason as to why, again, $1 billion is still on the table, right? This movie ended at 946. The fact that it's still making money and a lot of money internationally, again, probably another 20-30 million added for this past week alone. Yeah, we're looking at these numbers dropping 30-40% every week domestically and internationally. So $1 billion is absolutely on the table, and it beating out Minecraft is also very much on the table as well. Putting it up against Jurassic World Dominion is also interesting too, because at the same point of release, the same weekend, right, the end of the fifth weekend, 186 million is where that film was, and Jurassic World Dominion was only at 376. So this film already is edging out Jurassic World Dominion. Now, it ended up being over $400 million domestically. I think we could all say Lilo and Stitch is easily going to beat that. The big question, of course, is going to be international. Again, it's not going to get close to that 673. That's the only reason why Dominion ended up being $1 billion film. But it's still going to be very strong. It's still going to be quite a bit more than a Minecraft movie. So this is the reason why, right? It's going to do better than Minecraft, but maybe not as good, at least internationally, than Dominion, though it's going to beat Dominion's domestic. So that's why it's like, who knows, right? Flip a coin almost at this point. So yeah, is it realistic for it to hit $1 billion? Yeah, I would say yes at this point. Again, I hate to go back and forth with that, but this is the reason why I'm looking at these numbers saying $1 billion is absolutely possible at this point. And I would say there's a almost 0% chance that it doesn't beat Minecraft in its total box office either. So again, a huge win for Disney there. However, much of those wins are going to be kind of eaten away by how much money Elio is losing at the box office. Lastly, for the worldwide numbers here for Mission Impossible Final Reckoning, 540, again, sounds great on paper. We'll go ahead and do this live, right? Where does this actually, match up against Dead Reckoning Part 1? We'll obviously have to adjust those numbers for inflation as well to try to keep it fair, right? Dead Reckoning Part 1 ended at $584 million globally. So I think Final Reckoning does have a chance, right? It is still, as you can see, in the day-to-day performances, very much beating out what Dead Reckoning Part 1 was doing. So I think that, hey, this making more than Dead Reckoning is very likely. But again, that massive $400 million budget, and again, that's after a $300 million budget of Dead Reckoning Part 1. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I think some of that number was diminished over time, though, because they did get some insurance money. I don't know if the numbers.com's number here is going to be reflecting that or not, since these are adjusted numbers for inflation. But still, man, oh man, had they not spent that much money, these could have been massive box office wins. But hey, budgets are still the name of the game in today's world. All right, let's do some box office projections before we end things here today. I feel like I've gone on long enough here. So we have the 2-week total for Materialist and for How to Train Your Dragon. So when it comes to Materialist, we're projecting that film to make between $44 and $62 million by the end of its run, if it has a typical average run. And for How to Train Your Dragon live action, we're expecting the film after $358 million here, after 2 weeks worldwide, to make between $511 and $716 million globally by the end of its run. So that's still a far cry from $1 billion. And so $150 million budget means this film is well on its way to profit. In fact, if we look at the profits for these movies, $82 to $204 million in net profits for How to Train Your Dragon. If you take into account the 3 times multiplier, it's probably closer to $75 to $200 million. So that's still very, very healthy, likely to fall more so in the average or even above average range, depending on the numbers. So we're looking at least $100 million net profit, so that's a very good sign for them going forward. Whereas Materialist is expected to either lose $3 million or make $7 million, and so probably lose $5 to $7 million or make $5 to $7 million, probably is what we're likely to see here. VOD sales, Blu-ray 4K sales, this film won't end up being a loss for the studio by any means. Now, if we go ahead to the other two releases that we've had so far of Elio and 28 Years Later, if we use our typical standard of, again, most films tend to make a third of their entire worldwide box office in their opening weekend globally, $35 million, again, times 3, that would put it just above $100 million. Hard to say whether that's going to happen for the movie or not, but even if it is, it's going to be one of the lowest grossing Disney Pixar films, animated films of all time, right? Adjusted for inflation, looking at all of the numbers, all the comparisons there, one of the weakest numbers that Disney has ever seen in almost any of its franchises. Very, very bad. Whereas for 28 Years Later, we can expect this film to make upwards of $180 million globally. One of the issues there is that would put it just at its break-even point. So again, would be okay for the movie, probably would be able to make a little bit of profit on VOD and Blu-ray sales after the fact, since it's got a very passionate fan base, and though the fan base is a bit, split on this movie at this point, you do have enough people that would probably buy it on Blu-ray and 4K still, or VOD down the line, people that might be waiting for it to be on VOD. And so that very well could help it too. But as of right now, it's a decent opening for 28 Years Later. Could have been a lot better. I think some fans were expecting to do better. Had the film been better, I think it would have. That just did not happen for the movie. Again, there's so many more issues. The more I think about it, the more I just don't like it and have no desire to ever watch it again either. But anyway, those are the box office numbers as they stand. So what are y'all's thoughts 28 years later? Did you see the movie? How was it? Elio, your thoughts on that as well. And also, what do you think the final box office is going to be? Again, I know some are probably go right to Elemental was supposed to be a flop. Well, it wasn't even a huge box office win either because its budget was just so high. The same thing is going to be said for Elio. Even if it does leg out to $300 million, guess what? Its break even at even $150 million is still $450. Remember that for Elemental, it had a roughly the same budget, if not a little bit more. And so because it made $500 million, it barely broke even. It barely made a little bit of profit. And because it went straight to Disney Plus, they didn't get any money from that Disney Plus showing. Maybe it was able to sell the film to other streaming services. Maybe it was able to sell to other international services of some kind. I don't know exactly how their business dealings work, so maybe they were able to make something back there. But theatrically, it was not a huge box office winner by any means. And so, anyway, your thoughts on that, and also your thoughts on the long-term success of Materialist or How to Train Your Dragon. Where do you think those films are going to fall in the grand scheme of things? And we will do some final updates here as well into the other films that we've had just very, very quickly, looking at the total box office gross and profit margins. So Lilo and Stitch, $218 million in net profits, huge win for them. But just look at this, again, number here from Elio. If Elio doesn't do that much better than this, that means, guess what? Yeah, Lilo and Stitch is not going to make enough to pay back the losses on Elio, just as a way of looking at that. Now, that's just theatrically, right? So please spare me the merchandising and everything like that. We don't look at that here on this channel. We don't look at that here in this chart because that would just make me go insane trying to track every single thing for some reason. But anyway, your thoughts on these things. Let me know your comments on these and any other things I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Make sure you smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Sunday. And as always, God bless. Now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illick and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribestar people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. Also a huge shout out to my newest YouTube member, Raichu. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy, shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started, and also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing, and beautiful people, have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.